Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of The Life of the Emperor Francis Joseph by Francis Gribble. Chapter 31.
There were wheels within wheels, and the members of the romantic Quadruple Alliance were not absolutely united. They could hold together in the presence of alarums and excursions, but intimacy and reflection discovered weak points in the combination. The dissidence was not quite so sudden or pronounced as in the case of those Balkan states, which temporarily made common cause against Turkey, but lines of cleavage were nevertheless soon revealed, impairing the solidity of the Entente and introducing an appearance of comedy, not to say farce, into what should have been a drama of sustained and purely serious interest. The first jarring note was struck when Princess Louisa made the acquaintance of Wilhelmina Adamovitz. The ex-actress ran into the bedroom of the ex-archduchess at Zurich, bursting with affection and eager to take a new sister to her arms. But the ex-archduchess was not so democratic as all that. Though she had bicycled with the dentist and made assignations with the tutor, she could not forget that she was a Habsburg, but retained enough family pride to feel that it should have been left to her to take the initiative in emotional demonstration. The newcomer, she tells us, was obviously not of my world. And she continues, I was taken aback. I had not expected this, and I did not want it. I knew, indeed, that Leopold had fallen in love with a beautiful girl of the people, but it never crossed my mind that he intended to marry her, and I felt instinctively that her arrival in our midst would upset all our plans. I tried, however, to disguise my annoyance and to put some warmth into my greeting, but she was quite impossible, and I subsequently discovered that she had not even been trained in the rudiments of the art of behaving at table. Unquote. It was a bad beginning, and it was not made any better by the representations of the Vienna newspapers that the flight of the crown princess was exclusively due to her brother Leopold's influence. Their cue seems to have been to depreciate Leopold, and this is the place in which to reproduce the character sketch of him printed in the Neue Freie Presse. Archduke Leopold Ferdinand, we there read, is a very intelligent man, but somewhat eccentric, whimsical in a high degree, and difficult to manage. A prominent feature of his character is irony and sarcasm. He has in this way given much displeasure to officers of high rank, and this is the only reason why, in spite of his jovial and agreeable manner, he has made no friends in the army. While at Iglau, he was constantly in conflict with the commander of the regiment. Thus, one day he went out riding disguised as a lady, in company with another officer, and was seen and recognized by his commanding officer, who, of course, took him to task. He hates etiquette, loves free and easy manners, and has always had little intercourse with the aristocracy, preferring lively young people of the middle class. Unquote. The free and easiness of the Archduke's manners had indeed manifested itself in the presence of Francis Joseph himself, on the day on which he was summoned to the Emperor's presence to be told that his way of life was dissolute and indecorous. He did not, like John Orth, pelt the Emperor with the insignia of his orders, but he found another means, not less effective, of carrying the war into the enemy's camp, bowing politely and responding, I hear what you say, sir, but I fail to see why I should pay any attention to it. If there is a mote in my eye, there is a beam in yours. When you speak of such matters as these, I do not regard you as the Emperor of Austria. I merely regard you as Herr Schrat. Unquote. And so saying, he ceremoniously bowed himself out before Francis Joseph could lay his finger on the electric button, which would have summoned the secret police. Thus, by that tout quoque, he justified his own preference for lively young people of the middle class. But it nevertheless seems that, in Switzerland, the particular liveliness of Fräulein Adamovitz, after jarring from the first upon his sister's taste, came eventually to jar upon his own. It transpired in the course of time, in the course of a very short time, in fact, that the tastes, manners, and customs of Fräulein Adamovitz deviated from the healthy norm no less than those of the more eccentric of the Habsburgs, albeit in a different direction. Her passion for the simple life and the return to nature lured her on to proceedings hardly compatible with sanity. The goal of self-realization, it seemed to her, could only be attained if men and women divested themselves of their clothing, and climbed trees in order to crack nuts. A strange doctrine, truly, and one to be condemned by those pragmatists who bid us test every doctrine by the touchstone question, will it work? It found its condemnation in this case when Herr Wolfling began to translate theory into practice. After running wild in woods for a season, he was persuaded by the jeers of a passerby to visit a barber's shop, and the sudden sight which he got of himself in the barber's mirror, the spectacle of a hirsute savage suggesting a wild man from Borneo, decided him to return to civilization by the shortest cut available. He ran to the nearest slop shop, put himself into a reach-me-down check suit, engaged rooms in a pension, and shortly afterwards divorced the wife who had lured him into his amazing courses, and sought another wife of a more commonplace kind. His second wife was a Swiss lady, Fräulein Ritter, and his union to her appears to have been more fortunate. He acquired the rights of citizenship in the canton of Zug, and he presently obtained damages in a Swiss court of law against a journalist who circulated the report that he had always lived and was still living a disorderly life and had refused to pay his rates. The dispute about the rates was only a dispute about an assessment, and the tribunal endorsed counsel's favorable estimate of Herr Wolfling's personal worth. It is interesting to compare that estimate with the depreciatory paragraph quoted from the Neue Freie Presse, and we may borrow the report of the Independance Belge. In Austria, we there read, Monsieur Leopold Wolfling was indifferent to the attractions of fashionable life, but enjoyed himself in middle-class society. He was understood to be one of the most cultivated members of the archducal house. He speaks and writes 10 or a dozen languages correctly, and has a knowledge of mathematics and astronomy which would qualify him to occupy a professorial chair in any university in the world. He is also an experienced navigator of the seas. At Salzburg, where he lived for a long time, he became very popular. His superiors considered him too considerate to the soldiers serving under his orders. His relations with his father continued to be extremely cordial even after he had retired from the army. It is absolutely untrue to say that he has been compelled to abandon the profession of arms, but the resignation of his titles involved the resignation of his commission. Note that of all his orders, he has kept only the modest Cross of Merit, bestowed upon the young Archduke by the Emperor himself for saving 2 men from drowning. Unquote. Decidedly, the Archduke Leopold had the beau role on that occasion. Not only did he leave the Swiss court without a stain on his character, but his calumniator narrowly escaped imprisonment for defamation and had to pay a heavy fine. It was at about this date that Signor Toselli made his acquaintance and was inspired to the following pen portrait of the Archduke. He was a tall, fine man, fair, stout, loud-voiced, and genial. He lived in an English boarding house where he did exactly as he liked. He trailed about most of the day in carpet slippers. Unquote. Some may think that that was carrying liberty to the verge of license, but it is perhaps not less natural for an archduke unwittingly to infringe the etiquette of boarding houses than for a parvenu to infringe the etiquette of courts. In Austria, it has been said, the aristocracy dare not ask the professors to dinner for fear lest, if they were worldly enough to dress for the banquet, they should wear green ties with their dress clothes. Herr Wolfling, at any rate, spoke his mind about courts and kings, and also about his sister. Court life is stupid, dull, and wretched. Everything about it is insufferable. I cannot breathe at court. A free man has the world at his feet, but a prince or king is the puppet of his surroundings. And also on another occasion, kings are just like other men. Not 1 in 100 is worth a cent. Perhaps even that is an exaggerated estimate. As for my sister, she is a crazy creature. At her age, she might surely keep out of mischief. That was rather an unkind criticism, especially so soon after he and Princess Louisa had made the plunge into the simple life together. But it appears that, though Princess Louisa had, like her brother, the courage of her convictions, she was more a creature of impulse, more inclined to pose, and less consistent in her view of the obligations of simplicity. Half the journalists of Europe had assembled at Geneva, as we have seen, to give her a gallery to play to. And she played to that gallery like an operatic star, taking the air with Monsieur Giron daily amid the applause of the collected populace, and thereby somewhat shocking the opinion of the rigid city of Calvin. This is how, speaking to the wife of an artist who called on her, she manifested her joy in her emancipation. What a happy woman you must be to be married to an artist who has a high standard and tries to make his life square with it. Then you are free to do as you please, to dress as you like, to wear out your clothes. I have often to dress 6 times a day. Unquote, perhaps. But Princess Louisa had engaged the whole of the first floor of the Hotel d'Angleterre for herself and her suite, and it was remarked that this proceeding seemed to reflect an archduchess's rather than an ascetic's conception of simplicity. It was remarked, too, that her literary tastes, in so far as these could be inferred from the books which she borrowed from the Geneva libraries, appeared to be of a decadent modernity. Her favorite authors were discovered to be Gérard de Nerval and Baudelaire. Excellent authors indeed, but not authors whose message is for the simple and unsophisticated. But let that pass. This work is not the life of Princess Louisa of Tuscany, nor need we dwell upon the withdrawal of Monsieur Jérôme from the princess's entourage, or upon her own nervous breakdown and consequent retreat into a maison de santé. Very possibly the two events had some connection with each other, but it does not matter. Nor does the behavior of Monsieur Jérôme himself matter, though it is impossible not to commend him before one dismisses him, for the chivalry with which he has kept silence. At the height of the romantic battle, indeed, he was no more discreet than the rest, and could hardly be expected to be so. He was very young, and he evidently believed that great things had happened, and that still greater things were about to happen. If he and Princess Louisa were going to defy the Habsburg system by living happily together ever afterwards, there was no reason why their gestures should not be as defiant as their actions. But that, as it turned out, was not to be. Once more there were wheels within wheels. Once more there was an interposition of some sort, which threw the machinery out of gear. There is some reason to believe that the interposition was of a pecuniary character, though none for believing that Monsieur Jérôme himself was bought off. But the day nevertheless came when Monsieur Jérôme discovered that his mission was terminated. As Princess Louisa puts it, Monsieur Jérôme did not remain long in Switzerland. My reputation being thoroughly compromised by his presence, my object was achieved, and he therefore returned to Brussels. It is rather a cold-blooded way of putting it. Monsieur Jérôme may well have felt that Princess Louisa was resuming as a woman all the rights which she had forfeited as an archduchess. But he raised no public protest at the time, and he has raised none since, though the wealthy proprietors of sensational newspapers have often tempted him to do so. One need seek no other explanation than the fact that he was a gentleman, too chivalrous to bear malice if there was any to be borne, conscious that his chivalry had led him into mistaken courses, and only anxious that the world should forget his error. After all, how many private tutors of his tender age, however respectably connected, can lay their hands upon their hearts and vow that they, in his place, would have been irresponsive to the appeal of a fascinating crown princess? But let that pass too, for our business is only with Princess Louisa, and with her only insofar as her case illustrates the failure of the Habsburg system and the impulse of the family to revolt, as it were, against itself. No theory of her possessing a double dose of original sin can justly be invoked to account for her proceedings. The impulse to revolt was as physiologically sound in her case as in any of the others, but it was stirred in her too late. She was too radically affected to be saved by it. There is something pathetic in the picture of her efforts to recover her balance, so desperate, yet so unavailing. In her restlessness, if in nothing else, she reminds one a little of the Empress Elisabeth. One sees her, as one sees the Empress, driven continually from place to place, seeking she knows not exactly what, but always failing to find it. But one does not see her, as one sees the Empress, guarding her secret like a delicate flame, which must at all costs be sheltered from the wind. Her disposition is, rather, to expose the flame to all the winds which blow, in the hope that one or other of them may fan it to a blaze. For she is, after all, a Habsburg, and that is how the Habsburgs differ from the Wittelsbachs. The contrast has been pointed out already, but the point may be made again, in French, because there is no exact equivalent in English for the French phrases. The typical Wittelsbach, sane or insane, is two en dedans. The typical Habsburg, conventional or unconventional, is two en dehors. Princess Louisa's career exemplified the distinction when she bicycled in the park with the dentist and when she summoned Monsieur Giron to Switzerland to compromise her. A further illustration of it was furnished when she affianced herself to that promising young pianist, Signor Toselli. The contrast leaps to the eyes in Signor Toselli's report of the first compliments which she paid him. Quote, "I love the society of artists. Their views are so noble and so generous. They are far above the petty prejudices of other men. Their conversation is stimulating and inspiring. You cannot imagine how badly they are treated at the court of Dresden. They are simply paid their fee and dismissed." Even Monsieur Paderewski, the princess added, would have been simply paid his fee and dismissed if she had not herself run forward with tears in her eyes and clasped him by the hand. The Wittelsbachs do not talk like that, but, entertaining similar sentiments, act on them more quietly and more as a matter of course. Nor does one hear of the Wittelsbachs making their declarations of love with that dramatic directness with which, if one may trust Signor Toselli, who has not Monsieur Giron's instinct for reticence, Princess Louisa made hers. One does not picture a Wittelsbach putting to a comparative stranger the straight questions, "Have you ever loved? Tell me, do you feel capable of love?" Nor could one readily credit a Wittelsbach with the naive vanity of the following announcement of artistic aims and gifts. "I shall write the words to your music. I feel a hitherto unused talent stirring within me. I can also do sculpture." What wonder if Signor Toselli, being only 24, was persuaded by such exclamations that all the fairy tales were coming true? And that though he was warned. "Do you really know the Crown Princess of Saxony, sir?" said Countess Fugger to him. "Do you realize her character and the life she has led? Rather than commit such folly, I would advise you to go into the garden, this very instant, and put a bullet through your brain." Unquote. But the warning fell upon deaf ears, and it is impossible to feel surprise at its having done so, not only because a child was about to be born, but also for a good many other reasons. Rank does not cease to dazzle because the high-born condescend, but often dazzles all the more effectively by causing the lowly-born to feel at ease in their preferment, as well as proud of it. The chances of really romantic adventure, too, are rare in modern life. And a young musician is even less likely than most other young men to turn his back on them in a calculating spirit of sober self-restraint. The blaze of publicity is not a thing from which the conditions of his calling have taught him to shrink. Signor Toselli did not shrink from it, and doubtless he enjoyed his hour of rapture. He and his bride changed their names with the rapidity of genius. At the office of the London registrar, they were, of course, Signor Toselli and Princess Louisa of Tuscany, but at the Hotel Cecil, they were Signor and Signora San Marcellino, and at the Norfolk Hotel, they were Monsieur and Madame Dubois. When they started for their honeymoon, their railway carriage was besieged by reporters, and they may well have believed that the acclamations of the world's press saluted their definite entrance into the joys of an earthly paradise. But if that was their belief, then they were mistaken in it. In Princess Louisa's case, as we have said, the hour of revolt had struck too late. Her spiritual revolution was, in some respects, rather like the Great French Revolution, which continued to proceed from excess to excess and from extravagance to extravagance, long after its ostensible purpose had been achieved. She might be able to do sculpture, but there were certain other things, more important than sculpture, which she found it impossible to do. Above all, she could not settle down and keep her allegiance fixed. She had no sooner settled down in one place than she wanted to move on and settle down somewhere else. Like little Jo, she was Alice a moving on, and the meaningless migrations were a weariness of the flesh to her husband and a hindrance to his professional prospects. "You are killing the artist in me," he said to the woman who had once assured him that artists were, of all men, the noblest and the worthiest to be loved. After that, there was estrangement, culminating in separation, but mitigated by collaboration in a comic opera. The plot of it based upon Princess Louisa's recollection of certain incidents in her career as Crown Princess of Saxony. The proof is clear that, in her case, if not also in his, the passion for publicity has survived the passion for romance, but the end is not yet, and is not likely to prove of a significance which would warrant the suspension of the publication of this work until it occurs. Princess Louisa's story has been an excursus, albeit a necessary one, seeing that it illustrates, even to the point of absurdity, the Habsburg habit of doing melodramatic things melodramatically, as if they felt conscious that, whether they sat on thrones or slid off them, they owed at once an entertainment and an object lesson to the admiring curiosity of the world. And that, of course, is the reason why the Habsburgs have been at once so interesting and so troublesome to the head of their house. When they have sinned, as he would account it, offended, at all events, against the ancient traditions of the house, they have not been contented to go out and sin quietly. They have, on the contrary, sinned, if not strongly, at least demonstratively, as if their business was everybody's business, and it behoved both the courts and the peoples to take note. And Francis Joseph, on his part, has not failed to take note, protesting, as it were, against Habsburg sideshows and reasserting those Habsburg principles which the rebels have rejected, with a vigor which sometimes reminds one of the last roar of a dying lion. We must return to him, though, in truth, there remains but little to be said.
Chapter 32.
Francis Joseph, at the moment of writing, has passed not only his 83rd birthday, but the 65th anniversary of his accession. Since the death of the late regent of Bavaria, he has been the doyen of European rulers, and his reign has been longer than that of any modern monarch except Louis XIV, who came to the throne as a small child. His health is naturally the subject of constant preoccupation and infinite precaution on the part of his entourage, and last year he was kept indoors at Schönbrunn from the middle of October until the middle of April. To what extent he is now able to govern, as well as to reign, only his ministers know, but it is understood that, while they mobilize the army, he prays that there may be peace in his time. Most likely, he will get his way. There prevails throughout Europe, as well as throughout Austria, a sentimental feeling that he has suffered enough, and that it would be cruel to disturb his last days with war or civil commotion. That sentiment may be expected to count for more than the impatience of those Ruthenian deputies who have taken to silencing their German rivals in the Reichsrath by banging gongs and sounding motor horns. It might not be so if the problems to the discussion of which the sounding of those motor horns is an emotional contribution were quite ripe for settlement. But the day of reckoning must still be deferred a little. It is not before the blowing of motor horns that the walls of Jericho will fall down flat, and it is improbable that Francis Joseph will live to see the solution of the problem which their tumult heralds. Still, there the problem is, and we must take a final glance at it before we quit the subject. It is an old problem in a new form. A fresh presentation of the problem propounded by that resettlement of Europe in 1815, which served as our historical starting point. The problem arising out of the claims of ignored but inextinguishable nationalities. The shifting of the orientation of the Austrian outlook from the Italian to the Balkan Peninsula, so often acclaimed as an act of wise statesmanship, has only restated that problem in a fresh shape. For the Italia Irredenta, which was a thorn in the side of Austria in the past, it has substituted a Servia Irredenta, which will prove a thorn in the side of Austria in the future. In the days when the change was effected, the Servians were a despised people, and the Austrians and Hungarians believed the Turks, who declared that, in their many battles with the Servians, they had only seen their backs. They took that view alike of the Servians within the empire, the Servians of Illyria, Dalmatia, Croatia, and other regions, and of the Servians of the independent kingdom of Servia. The former, it seemed to them, were naturally their slaves. The latter were a feeble folk, incapable, and never likely to be capable, of delivering those slaves from servitude. But now they are not so sure. Their Bosnian war established the unexpected truth that men of Servian race not only hated Austrian domination but could make a good fight for their independence. The recent Balkan War has renewed the warning, And it remains to be seen what will happen now that there is a strong Servia, at least as strong as the old kingdom of Sardinia, to which the unredeemed Servians can look for their redemption. The situation, in short, reproduces in almost every particular the conditions which led to the formation of the Kingdom of United Italy. It is a situation in which there is one incalculable factor, the internal dissensions of the Balkan peoples. Those enmities are undeniably acute, and Austria is clearly determined to foment them in order to postpone, if not to frustrate, the welding together of a formidable Balkan confederation. That is the obvious inwardness of her recent support of Bulgaria and Albania. The plan may answer for the moment, but it can hardly avail in the long run for two reasons. Albania is too disorganized to count. Bulgaria is too weak to have any future except as a member of a Balkan confederation, and there is also Romania to be reckoned with. Romania, which may prove to be at once a consolidating influence in the Balkans and an influence hostile to Austria. The fact that there is a Romania irredenta as well as a Servia irredenta may be expected to draw the Servians and the Romanians together. And their ultimate purpose in drawing together would obviously be to raise the questions of the two unredeemed territories simultaneously. If that should happen, the history of United Italy can hardly fail to repeat itself in the Danubian states. That it would so repeat itself there was one of Mazzini's political predictions, and he exhorted his countrymen, when the day came, to go over to Macedonia and help the Slavs. If they should ever do so, they will certainly want to help themselves to the Trentino at the same time, and they might alternatively, triple alliance or no triple alliance, demand the Trentino as the price of their neutrality. The danger is perceived, of course, in Vienna, and there are those in Vienna who have their plan for meeting it. The Archduke Francis Ferdinand himself is generally understood to have a plan: the transformation of the dual monarchy into a triple monarchy, the third of his trinity of kingdoms to be a kingdom of Slavs. To some, the idea seems a brilliant inspiration, to others, a counsel of despair. It derives most of the value which it has from the fact that a majority of the Slavs within the empire are Catholics, whereas a majority of the Slavs without the empire belong to the Orthodox Church, and that the Catholics despise the Orthodox as their inferiors in piety and civilization. The Archduke, as a very religious man, the sort of man whom people speak of as being in the hands of the Jesuits, relies apparently upon differences of creed to keep the Slavs divided and weak, in spite of the brotherhood of race. He may be right, but there are not wanting indications that he is wrong. Even in the Balkans, religious fanaticism is no longer the force that it used to be, and the Austrian police has recently had all its work cut out to prevent inopportune explosions of sympathy with Servian successes in Croatia. There and in Bosnia and in Dalmatia, just as of old in Lombardy and in Venetia, explosions have only been prevented, perhaps one should say have only been deferred, by the policy of sitting on the safety valve. And when that policy has to be adopted, things never fail to happen, which make the oppressed difficult to reconcile. Moreover, there is a further difficulty, already indicated on a previous page, the difficulty which has its double root in Slav numbers and Austro-Hungarian pride. Of all the races which make up the composite empire, the Slavs are the most numerous. Admitted to the empire on equal terms, they will be in a position to control it. To control, that is to say, the Austrians and Hungarians who have hitherto controlled them. If that were allowed to happen, the condition of things created might be as intolerable to the Austrians and Hungarians as is the existing state of things to the Slavs. Foreseeing this, they will be reluctant to take the step which will compel them to bow their necks, and, if they do take it, yet another unredeemed question will be raised: the question whether the Teutonic portion of the Habsburg dominions should not be regarded as Germania irredenta. The Pan-Germanists of Prussia already, as we know, take that view of it, and Slav predominance might easily create a Pan-Germanist party in Austria also. Indeed, the nucleus of a Pan-Germanist party already exists there. One doubts, therefore, whether the plan of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand, bold though the conception is, will prove to be a panacea. It strikes one as an artifice, a piece of diplomatic jugglery, And the forces which really determine the course of history are forces which mere juggling is powerless to control. The real rivalry of the Europe of today and tomorrow is the rivalry between Teuton and Slav. And that is a rivalry which has its origin not merely in conflicting material interests, but in fundamental antipathies of character. As long as Teutons are anywhere ruling over Slavs, no policy of live and let live is feasible. And as the Slavs increase in numbers and in racial self-consciousness, the clash is bound to come. When it does come, when the unredeemed Slavs, assisted by the unredeemed Romanians, insist upon their redemption, Austria will have played her part on the stage of European history, and the curtain may be rung down. That is one of the predictions with which we may leave our subject. But there is also another speculation which it would be difficult to avoid. What of that House of Habsburg, which has so long been the personal incarnation of the Austrian Empire? Whither is it tending? On what will its ultimate destiny depend? Will the family problems prove to be more easily soluble than those of the empire itself? Will it still be in the future, as it has been in the past, the unifying principle of a complex political system? One doubts it. One cannot help doubting it for various reasons. The question before us, before Austria rather, is the question of the importance which the world of the immediate future will attach to family pride and the exclusiveness of an imperial caste. And that is a question about which the world of today does not quite seem to have made up its mind. It has gained a little knowledge without losing an equal proportion of prejudice, and has reached a point at which it finds it equally difficult to live either with its superstitions or without them. It is moved. It cannot help being moved by the formidable array of facts by which the eugenists demonstrate that the path to degeneracy is paved with consanguineous marriages. But at the same time, it cannot easily shake off its instinctive reluctance to accord imperial dignity to the offspring of a healthy young woman of what it regards as the lower orders. It is, the world feels, very embarrassing to have to choose between a degenerate and a person of inferior social status. That, nevertheless, is the choice which lies before Austria in the immediate future. Francis Ferdinand, as we have seen, has married beneath him. His marriage is morganatic. That is to say that, when he comes to the throne, the heir to the throne will not be his son, but his nephew. That nephew is a young man about whom comparatively little is known, but when Francis Ferdinand goes into the matter, he will do so with the following facts before him. 1. The heir to the throne is the son of the family scapegrace, who used to dance in cafes in puris naturalibus. 2. This heir is married to a lady who comes of the decadent Bourbon Parma stock. 3. This young man and his wife and his family are taking precedence of his own wife, whom he loves, and the healthy children whom she has borne him. The superstition of caste would indeed be strong in Francis Ferdinand if he regarded that as a right and proper state of things. And the mere fact that he married as he did, in the face of the opposition which he encountered, shows clearly that, whatever superstitions may still retain a hold on him, that particular superstition has relaxed its grip. Is he likely, human nature being what we know it to be, to accept an affront inflicted in the name of a superstition which he has abandoned? Can we expect his wife and his children to press him to do so? Obviously, we cannot. The thing might have happened in bygone ages, or even in comparatively recent ages, when universal opinion drew a religious as well as a social distinction between hereditary sovereigns and their subjects, and the personal dignity of the individual counted for nothing in comparison with that great impersonal principle. It cannot happen now that all impersonal principles are in the melting pot, and so many postulates which men used to grant as they now grant the law of gravitation are being brought to the bar of opinion to be cross-examined. The postulate which bids the progeny of an emperor who married for love take a lower seat than the son and grandsons of the family scapegrace will assuredly be questioned by the next emperor of Austria, and it will be found that it has nothing to say for itself. It may die fighting, but it will die, and the whole of the Habsburg superstition will die with it. What will happen then lies in the lap of the gods. It is, however, precisely because of its gradual approach to such problems as these that one finds the reign of Francis Joseph such an intensely interesting period of history. It is interesting from the personal point of view as the story of nemesis overtaking the oppressor, the story which we have presented symbolically as the story of the fulfillment of Countess Caroli's curse. Philosophically, it is interesting as the age of transition from medieval to modern ideas, the age in which both nationalities and individuals have stormily asserted their right to live their own lives in their own way. In both these matters, we see in Austria more clearly than anywhere else the hungry generations treading down the past. It is seldom that so complete an evolution of outlook is coextensive with the life of a single sovereign. Perhaps, indeed, Francis Joseph's reign has been unique in that respect. In any case, he has witnessed all these changes and lived through all these intellectual and emotional experiences. His role, while doing so, has been to keep up appearances. But if we could penetrate to the realities behind the appearances, we should assuredly find that he had not himself been unaffected by the transformations going on around him. That is the true moral of the story of his affection for Frau Schratt, and of the rumor of his desire to give that lady his left hand in marriage. He felt what the other Habsburgs felt, though he controlled his feelings better. Seeing what the other Habsburgs were doing, he had the impulse to be in the movement, though he resisted it. He, like the rest, has sometimes had the intuition that happiness lay in living one's own life rather than the corporate life of one's country. And there are moments when his biographer feels that, in spite of all the pomp and glory which have attended his public career, the day of days for him must have been the day on which he met Frau Schratt, who, after 28 years of mutual devotion, now totters down the hill with him at the journey's end. Daily, for a little while, when health permits, he sits with her and wonders. We will leave him wondering.
This concludes The Life of the Emperor Francis Joseph, by Francis Gribble. We hope you've enjoyed this volume. For more military history audiobooks, subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.